Hey up and welcome to another episode of Last Cast. You join us up at Hilltop Reservoir today and it looks like I'm attached to the first skimmer or bream of the session. We're probably about an hour into the session now and we've had a fair few indications. We've had hooked and landed 2 roach and missed a couple of bites as well. This looks to be the first better fish of the session and this one's just come after the feed has been in about 5 minutes. We're in the latter stage of February now, so it's still quite cold, but we've had a strange sort of warm spell now. As you can see, it's absolutely flat calm and really bright today, and air temperatures are probably about 12 degrees, so that's obviously influenced where I've decided to fish in the peg and the range, because the crucial thing on here is obviously the depth that we're fishing at. It was like a nice quality fish, this. It's a nice little skimmer. And we've just had that one on 2 red maggots tipped with a pinky. As you can see, lovely fat fish, that one. Probably about a pound, maybe a pound and a quarter. Just nailed perfectly in the top lip, that one. So we'll get him unhooked and then run you through what we're doing today. Lovely little skimmer there. So as I said, we're up at Hilltop Reservoir today, and after the past few weeks where it's been quite difficult fishing on the canals and places like that, decided to come up here and hopefully get a few fish on the feeder. It's probably about 4 or 5 years since we last visited this place and did a video on the feeder, where we fished much further up towards the inlet end, sort of back end of summer I believe it was. But today, as I say, it's end of February, the water temperature is very cold, probably still sort of 6-7 degrees. But at least the fish now seem to be moving around, having a bit of a feed after it's been sort of sub-zero. I mean, a couple of weeks ago this lake was actually frozen. So as I say, we've decided to tackle it with feeder kit today. Normally up here there's a bit of a wind on it, but as you can see today it's flat calm, so we could have probably got away with fishing a pole or a float, but it seems, since sort of past experience has dictated to me, that feeder fishing is the best way to go on here in terms of getting bites. So what we've decided to do, as I say at the start of the session, is have a good lead around, as we always do on here. And what I've decided to look for is a depth of around sort of 12 to 15 feet deep. Now the way I've gauged that is I've put a 2-ounce bomb on and chucked it out into the peg. But what I've started doing is I've actually chucked it probably only 11.5, 13 metres, something like that, because I know that's where it's about 10 foot deep on the pull when the levels are like this. So that's given me a good gauge, and that was just over a 2 count was that. So I've chucked the bomb out until I've basically worked my way further and further across the reservoir as it starts to go up the shelf till I found a 4 count, which to me will be about 15-16 foot of water, which I think is ideal for skimmers today. I think any deeper, then I don't think they'll get their heads down and feed, and any shallower, I think there's a chance of 1 or 2 pike in the edges, and I think that's where the roach tend to be. So I've picked that depth and we found that today at 51 metres. So I've clipped up 2 rods at the same distance, both tackled up exactly the same. I've got 2 12.5 foot Maver power lights, but I've rigged them up slightly differently. In terms of the hardware that we've got on here for the tackle, like I say, it's a Maver power light, lovely soft action rod as you've just seen there, perfect for catching skimmers and bream, but enough power to get us out to that distance of 51 metres. The reel, I've got 4000 size Shimano X-Ages, nice big handles, powerful reels, and I've got that loaded with 010 Daewoo J-braid and then an 8-pound Daewoo sensor shock leader, which is basically I'd say 2 lengths of the length of the rod, so up there, back and again, with about 3 or 4 turns on the reel, which just helps with taking the shock of the cast and also gives you a bit more stretch in the line when you're playing these bream and skimmers close in. Both of the rigs, as I say, are on that same setup, but one of them's got a 1/2 ounce tip, which is for the traditional sort of skimmer rig which we've got here and caught that one on. The other one's got an 1.5 ounce tip for a slightly different rig that I'll run you through in a second. So in terms of the rigs, I've got a sliding paternoster here with a short guru link, and I'm using Preston Dutch Master feeders in 30 gram sizes. So nice cage feeder, bullet shaped, so they cast like a bullet as the name suggests. Nice and easy to get the distance on those, and I just find they work ideal on here, especially if there's a wind on it. Now on this rig I've got a twizzle boom which goes down to the hook length, but one thing to note is I've got a little stopper, a little line stop above or float stop above the feeder, and this is crucial when I'm fishing on here, and it's something that makes a massive difference in my fishing when it comes to hitting bites on the feeder. Basically, it means that I can turn the rig into a bolt rig. At the moment, as you can see there, I've got it set about 1.5 inches away from the link. Occasionally, if the bites are very sort of slow and I need to let them develop, I'll slide that right up. Alternatively, if they're really aggressive and I'm missing lots of bites, I can pull that right down and make a bolt rig, which is ideal if you're catching roach or if the skimmers are feeding really aggressively. So that's just stopped on there with a couple of stops above the twizzled boom. It's about sort of 5-6 inches long is the twizzled boom. And then hook length wise, I've gone for the same material and hook patterns on both. I'm using e163 fluorocarbon, which a lot of people think is quite heavy for feeder fishing, but I think that the heavier and the stiffer the hook length material you can get away with, the better you can present your bait. It means that the feeder will sit further away from the hook bait when it's cast in, and also avoids line spin and tangles. And I just find equally, because it's much stiffer and a bit heavier and a lot less stretch in fluorocarbon, I think it helps with bite registration as well. So it's something I'd highly recommend. In terms of the hooks that I'm using Tubertini Series 18s. On this rod, I've got a size 16, which I'll probably step up to a 14 if I start using baits like double corn and worm. In all fairness, these hooks, a 16 is probably more like a 14, and a 14 is more like a 12, so nice big positive hooks. And it just means that when you are fishing with big feeders and casting long distances, you're not as likely to pull out of the fish, so you've got full confidence that you've got a good hook hold should you need to really lean into the fish. So that's the 12-foot rod with the traditional setup, and as you can see, the hook length there is probably about 2.5 feet long, something like that. Now the other rod that I've got set up, as I say, it's duplicate kit, but it's a different rig. This is basically, as some people might know, it's like a dink rig or a helicopter rig. And this is if the fishing's really good and I'm missing lots of bites on that other rig and the fish are really going after the feeder. So instead of having the paternoster on this, I've actually got the hook length attached above the feeder, so exactly the same gear, the same shock leader and everything. Slightly bigger feeder on this. As I say, that's in the case I've used this for baiting up, as well as if there's a lot of fish in the peg, I can get much more feed in it. And then I've just got a twizzle boom above that, and then I've got a float stop, a swivel, and then another float stop as you work your way up. Now by pulling those down tight, I can lock that little swivel in place there, and I've got a short hook length, again e163, a little bit of silicone on there just to kick it away, and a size 14 hook, and that hook length's probably 6 inches long. And in the differences with this rod, I've got 1.5 ounce quiver tip in. So the idea being that if there's a lot of fish in the peg, I can sling this out there, hold a really nice tight line to the feeder, so as soon as the fish picks up the bait, they've only got a few inches to move, and then they're pulling against the feeder and the tip, and they'll hook themselves. So it's a brilliant rig that, like I say, when you're missing lots of bites on the traditional setup, that you can really do well on is this, and it can really change your fishing. Again, if it was even warmer or in the middle of summer, I'd even go down to fishing a pellet feeder, but this is a good compromise. I can still use a cereal mix, but like I say, fish nice and positive to try and avoid missing bites. So we'll just get this popped to one side, and I'll run you through the bait that we're going to use today. So as I mentioned there, cereal mixers. This time of year where it's still a bit cold is the water, I don't like to go down a pure fish meal route. I think just by having a nice balance between a cereal mix and a fish meal mix means that I've got the chance of drawing roach and skimmers into the peg, as well as getting the bigger bream as well. In summer I prefer to just fish as much fish meal in the mix as I can do to try and deter the roach and just concentrate on the skimmers, but the mix today is a nice compromise. As you can see, I've just got my bait to be, that's my working mix. The rest of the ground bait I've got mixed up just in one of these freezer bags. Obviously today, as you can see, the weather's very warm and dry, so I don't want that drying out and changing the consistency of the mix when I'm fishing. And that ground bait mix is equal parts swim stim black for the fish meal content, Census River and Census Lake. As you can see, a nice dark brown blackish mix, so it blends in nicely with the bottom. It's not too alarming for the fish, so the pike aren't going to sort of deter them from feeding. And the main reason I've gone for that mix is the lake and the swim stim. It's a nice traditional compromise for catching skimmers that I find, but I've added some river in there because of the depth. I want that feeder to go down and get to the bottom. Now a lot of people, they might fish stuff like window feeders with a drier mix. For me, because I'm concentrating on fishing cage feeders today, I want to make sure the mix binds nicely in the feeder and holds the bait to the bottom. So what I've done when I've started is I've got my feeder, made my mix up, and then tested it in the water and counted how long it's taken to break down before it releases the bait, and it's about sort of 10 seconds, which is perfect. When I'm chucking the feeder out, it's taking about 8 seconds, 7 or 8 seconds to get to the bottom on a 30 gram feeder, so it means that it's getting there, and then within 2 or 3 seconds it's starting to release the bait, so that's perfect. In terms of the bait selection today, it's relatively simple. I've got some 3mm swim stim green micros, an ideal holding bait for skimmers. I've got a little bit of corn, so I'm just going to introduce 1 or 2 grains of that, mainly for the colour content, but it's also a good hook bait. But I feel when you've got skimmers in your peg, just a little flash of yellow like that can hopefully draw them to the bottom. The main feed today is going to be dead maggots. As you can see, I've got a nice mixture of colours in there. Probably got 1.5 pints, and that's going to be the bulk of the feed. I've also brought with me some worms as well, probably 1/2 kilo dendrobenus. Now, what I don't like to do at the start is feed with worm. It just means that I've got somewhere to go. If I'm struggling for bites or I want to change what's happening in the peg and try and draw some fish in, I can just introduce a little bit of chopped worm and switch to a worm on the hook. And often that can sort of prolong your session rather than starting with chopped worm in the feeder. Hook bait wise, I've got some pinkies just to tip my worm and maggot hook baits, but main thing is going to be maggots to start with. And then if I start getting bitted out with roach, that's when I'll switch to worm or corn on the hook. So it's quite a simple bait tray, quite a simple approach, 2 rods, just fishing 1 line and fishing nice and positive. So we'll get the feeder slung back out there again, and hopefully we'll try and get one pretty quickly shortly after. Right, so after we've done the intro and had that skimmer, we'll get cast out again. So because I've started getting a few more bites, I'm putting quite a bit of feed in the feeder, probably 3 or 4 grains of corn, pinch of dead maggots and a good pinch of micro pellets as well. Just squeezing that down, so like I say, that mix is binding nicely into the cage, so it's nice and firm, and we'll get it cast out. So obviously because we're fishing at a decent range of 51 metres today, having to stand up to cast, just obviously check that there's no resistance in the rod rings, make sure the line's not tangled in the rings before you cast out. Nice positive cast, hit the clip, and then just sinking the rod. So as that feeder's sinking, it's helping pull the braid through the surface tension. If there was a bit of skim on the water, that braid would go straight through the surface tension, but because it's flat calm today, I'm just having to hold the rod under the water while it's sinking. And that's just assisting the braid to get through the surface film. It's just a case of pulling on that with the tip sunk a little bit, wait till the 2 V's on the water cross, and that's the line sunk. So I've got that set now, and all I do is just give it a little pull about 1 foot, just so I can feel the feeder move on the bottom. And for me, it just gives me confidence that the hook bait's straight, or the hook length straightened out behind the feeder in that case. So again, it's all these sort of little things are about helping you register the bites. Obviously with the braid and the carbon, nice light carbon tip, you're going to see the bites as soon as they happen, but you want to try and have as little slack line as possible, and as I say, that's where the fluorocarbon really comes in. And I see a lot of people where they'll fish sort of like 0.12, 0.13, 0.14 hook lengths on reservoirs like this, just, you know, in the faith that it'll help them get bites. But in my experience, you can get away with fishing really heavy hook lengths and decent size hooks for these sort of fish. As long as the hook pattern isn't too heavy, that's why I go for these Series 18s. It's still quite a nice light gauge, but I can get away with a nice big hook, so it just helps with that hook penetration when I do get a bite and that hook hull, but because it's not too heavy, it's quite easy for the fish to pick it up and accept it. So now that braid's set, we've got the tip set nicely there, just with a slight bend in it. Again, one thing that's really important when you feeder fishing, I mean, it's not sort of a style of fishing that I do all the time, so I'm certainly not the best feeder angler in the world, but you've got to make sure that you do time your casts. When we started today, the bites are basically, until that skimmer, have come after sort of 10 minutes. And then we had a couple of bites where the feeder had only been in sort of about a minute, which tells me that the fish then have come to the bait. So they've gone down and they've started to settle and feed in that area. Now we started the session today, what I did was I've obviously Found where I wanted to fish, found the depth with that 2-ounce bomb, which turned out to be 51 metres. I've gone to the sticks, got both rods clipped up at that distance, and then all I've done on that bigger feeder with a heavier rod, I've just put in 5 feederfuls to start with. Like I say, I've not put in any chop worm to start with because I want it to be an option that I can go to should the fishing change or I decide that I need to draw more fish into the peg. And then from that, we've just basically gone for 10-minute casts to start with. I think ideally what you want to do is get a nice little bed of bait down and then get the fish used to the feeder going in fairly regularly. In summer I might look to try and chuck it every 5 minutes when it's when I start the session, so I might put in 10 feederfuls and start on 5-minute casts. But today, because it's a bit colder and like I say we are still at the back end of winter, I've gone for 10-minute casts to start with, just to give the fish chance to go down and inspect the feed or the feeder before I pull it out of the peg. But it's not a bad start that. We're about, like I say, about an hour and a quarter in now. We've had 2 roach and a skimmer and we're getting the odd indication. So on this rig, like I say, my hook bait that I've started with and that I've caught everything on so far has been two red maggots tipped with a fluoro pinky. But again, it won't be long before I decide to switch to worm on this, especially now that I've had a skimmer. Quite often I find that just fishing half a dendrobina tipped with a fluoro pinky or two fluoro pinkies just seems to get a quicker bite. Again, the option being that if perch become a problem on the worm, that's when I can switch to a piece of corn on the hook as well. So it's just giving yourself options to rotate around. Again, if I'd have started on, you know, shorter rod, lighter gear, and just fishing like an 18s hook, I wouldn't have that option. I'd have to sort of chop and change between pinky and maggot on the hook. But by starting off nice and positive with the rigs, it means that I can change between various baits quite easily. So we'll leave this feeder in now for 10 minutes and see if we get a bite. Right, so that first chuck on camera, we've had a nice indication, but the maggots and pinkies come back a bit squashed and bust. So I'm straight away going to make a change now to fishing a section of a dendrobina worm on the hook. The feeder had been in probably about 2 minutes and we start to get a little bit of an inquiry. So it could well be that a skimmer's picked up that bait. What I'm just going to do is put on a section of worm and just tip it with a dead maggot. Now what I always do when I've cast out is straight away get some bait ready to put in the feeder. It just means you're much quicker then when you're bringing the feeder back in to get back out there. So it's just a case of scooping the bait into the feeder, then with these bullet feeders pushing that feeder into the corner of the ground bait bowl to plug the bottom end. So as you can see there, we've got a nice little section of a dendrobina worm there on a 16. And hopefully it should mean that the skimmers hold on to the bait a bit longer. So nice cast, hit the clip. And then just get the rod tip sunk. So feeder's just hit bottom now. So I'm just going to wind in a load of the braid and then just pull the rod back towards the rod rest so I can set it. Now if I was fishing a shallower venue that was sort of, or fishing a shallower peg even on here that was only 6 or 7 feet deep, I wouldn't be too worried about leaving that braid on the surface because it's still direct enough. But when we're fishing in sort of 15, 16 foot of water, I do want to make sure it's sunken below that surface tension, just so I can see the bites a bit easier. So same again now that feeder's gone out there, just preparing the next little feeder full. 3 grains of corn, a good pinch of micros, probably 20 micros, and a few dead maggots. So hopefully the next bite will connect with it. Right, so there we go, that was a nice positive bite there, and it feels like we're attached to another skimmer. I've had a couple of tiny little indications where the tip's just barely moving and I've left it. Bear in mind we're fishing with half a dendrobean and the tip's just shot round and stayed there. And that bite's come after 5 minutes, so we're definitely getting more indications now. It's as if the fish are definitely in the area. See, lovely, nice action on these rods. It's just what you want when you're catching skimmers. You don't want anything too sort of poker stiff that's great for casting, but not for playing these soft mouth skimmers. Looks like a little bit smaller than the first one, this. I say that one's just been taken on half a dendrobeaner, tipped with a dead maggot. It's about the same size. Lovely condition, just nailed right in the top lip again. Perfect hook hold. So they're not taking it all the way down. So hopefully it means that they're moving around a bit and they're getting hooked in the lip as opposed to sitting there and just chewing on the bait and getting hooked well down. So we'll take that hook bait off. What I tend to do with this, saves being economical, just when I've got a worm that's a bit bust, I'll just cut it in half and pop it in with the next feeder full. The same again, just going to go for probably 3/4 of a dendrobeaner this time. It's a nice target hook bait, nip the end off again, put that in with the ground bait to feed, and I'll just tip this one with a pinky. Again, the reason for putting a pinky on it, it's a little flash of colour, but it also stops the hook bait going over the hook pointers easily. Just keeps everything in place. So just load that feeder up again. Get cast back out. It's exactly the same process every single time. With that nice sort of light breeze today, it's not making the feeder move around too much in the air. But again, if it was sort of blowing a bit of a gale up here, these Dutch Master style feeders are perfect for keeping accuracy even in the worst conditions. So again, just tweaking the braid, making sure the tip's set nice and light. And we're ready to try and catch another one. Right, there we go, so we're into another skimmer now. Feels potentially a bit bigger, this one. Nice steady bite that. Barely moved the tip round though, so I've had a couple of strange little indications there. Even missed a couple of bites. So I've got a feeling the fish might be coming to the feeder, so I might well just have a quick cast on that other rig. And just see if it's a case that they are attacking the feeder, and as I say, with that other rig, shouldn't miss any bites. Again, this one just taking on a nice big bit of dendrobeaner tipped with a fluoro pinky. If I was a betting man, I'd say this is a slightly better stamp. And this might be £1.5 pounds, this one. Lovely skimmer that. It's definitely a bit thicker set, that one. Lovely fish. So that's 3 skimmers and 2 roach now, when we're only about 2 hours into the session. Again, just nailed right in the bottom lip. Certainly wasn't coming off that one. Lovely fish. Right, so there's another fish on now. Again, that one's come after about 6 minutes on the feed of that. So we had a quick cast on the helicopter rig, didn't get a bite on that, so after 10 minutes I've switched straight back to this. Within 6 minutes we've had a nice little pull on the tip and another skimmer on. And you can see it doesn't take long to build a weight catching fish of this sort of size. And what you'll often find is they do come with some regularity when you start getting into a shoal of bream like this. All the past few bites have come after 5-6 minutes. Fighting quite hard, could be a hybrid. This looks like another skimmer, this. And same sort of size to the last one. Another nice chunky fish. And you can just see that worm sticking out the corner of his mouth. Again, perfectly hooked. So we'll get him popped in the net and hopefully get another one. Right, so we're into another fish now. And this feels like a much better stamp. Certainly feels heavy. We've probably gone about an hour and a half without a fish, and I've just picked up to reel in, and this one's clearly been sat there with the bait in its mouth. So it's kiting round to the right a little bit. It's certainly been a case that when that cormorant's come into the peg, it's really unsettled the fish. And it's taken sort of half an hour to an hour each time it's come in to get indications again. This certainly feels like a bigger bream. Just feel it nodding its head. Again, this one's taking a slightly bigger piece of dendrobina. That's definitely a much better fish, this one. That's a proper bream. got to be at least £4, if not 5, that one. Certainly one of the bigger ones I've had out of here. Real quality fish that. As you can see, it's probably been had by a pike at some point in its life. It's got plenty of scarring on it. That's a proper old fish, is that. Lovely bream to catch. So we'll get him popped in the net and hopefully we'll snare 1 or 2 more. Alright, so there we go. We're into another skimmer now. We've had a really quiet spell over a couple of hours where we've just snared 1 more skimmer and a couple of little roach. But I think as we're getting towards the back end of the session, we'll call this the last fish. Doesn't feel massive, but probably another one of those sort of stamp skimmers, about a £1, £1.25. And same again, we've just taken this on the traditional feeder rig with 3/4 of a dendrous, tipped with a couple of dead maggots this time. And it's been fairly steady going today. We've had a few indications, but not many proper bites. But can't really complain considering the fact that it is still end of February and the water's still very cold. So just get this one in the net. As I say, I think we'll call this the last one. Lovely little stamp skimmer that. Say hooked right in the top lip. And there we go, we'll call that the last fish of the session. We'll get him popped in the keep net and have a look at what we've caught. Right, so as you can see there, that's our final net of fish. I think it's about 6 or 7 skimmers, about that sort of size. Some sort of £1.25, £1.50, and 1 or 2 of that size. We've also had a couple of little roach as well, which we've not really shown to camera, a few missed bites from them, and then 1 proper bream, which is that one, a lovely fish to catch that. Probably, I'd say something like £4 that one. You can see real quality fish that out of this reservoir. All taken on the feeder today at 51 metres. We've had to work quite hard for the bites. We've had a fair few indications and sort of missed bites off small fish picking at the worm, but when we've sat it out, we've ended up snaring 1 or 2 quality fish. And like I say, it's been a nice little session here, so we'll get these popped back. Hopefully there's a few things you can pick up from what we've run through today on feeder fishing these reservoirs, and we'll hopefully be back up here in summer when it's a bit warmer, trying to catch a few more of them. So as always from Last Cast, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.